Alyssa stood tall at the airport gate, holding her small handbag and boarding pass. She wore a simple black dress and a calm smile. Her soft curls framed her face as she walked toward the airplane, ready to enjoy a quiet flight. This was not her first flight. Alyssa traveled often, but today was special. It was her first time flying first class on this airline. She had worked hard, saved her money, and finally decided to treat herself. As she entered the plane, she looked around. The first-class section was bright and quiet. The seats were wide and comfortable, with soft blankets and sparkling water bottles waiting. A few passengers were already sitting, some looking at their phones, others sipping drinks. Alyssa walked confidently to her seat -1A, right by the window. She smiled. But before she could sit down, a white flight attendant stepped in front of her. The woman's name tag read Cheryl. She looked Alyssa up and down, from her shoes to her hair. Then she frowned. "Excuse me, miss," Cheryl said, blocking the seat. "This section is for first class only." Alyssa blinked. She wasn't sure what she meant. "Yes," she replied, politely. "This is my seat. 1A. Cheryl folded her arms. "Can I see your ticket?" Alyssa handed it to her. Cheryl looked at it quickly, then raised her eyebrows. "There must be some mistake," she said. "You should be in economy." Alyssa shook her head calmly. "There's no mistake. I booked this seat myself." Cheryl didn't even look at the ticket again. "I think you should step back, miss. You're holding up the line." Behind Alyssa, other passengers had started to gather. A few looked curious, others annoyed. One man in a business suit sighed loudly. Alyssa could feel the eyes on her, but she stood tall. "I paid for this seat," she said quietly. "Please check again." Cheryl gave her a sharp look. "Miss, I'm going to have to ask you to move. I don't want to have to call security." Alyssa's heart started to beat faster, but she didn't show it. She had done nothing wrong. She had paid for her ticket, followed all the rules, and now she was being treated like she didn't belong, just because of how she looked. "I'm not moving," Alyssa said, her voice steady. "I have a valid ticket. Please do your job and check it properly." Cheryl didn't like that answer. Her cheeks turned red with anger. "Do you want to cause a scene?" she asked, louder now. "Because I can have you removed from this plane." The businessman behind Alyssa chuckled. Maybe she thought this was the bus. He whispered to another passenger. Alyssa turned and gave him a look, but said nothing. She wouldn't argue. She wouldn't fight. But she also wouldn't back down. She turned to Cheryl. "I suggest you scan my ticket before making more assumptions." Cheryl didn't move. She stood there, arms crossed, face tight with judgment. Then a woman sitting in 1C took out her phone and began recording. "This is not okay," she said quietly. "She has a ticket. Let her sit down." Now Cheryl noticed the phone. Her eyes narrowed. "You can't film on the plane," she snapped. The woman didn't stop. "Then stop treating her like she doesn't belong." Passengers began whispering. One older man stood up and said, "Let the lady sit down." Still, Cheryl refused. She turned her back on Alyssa and walked down the aisle, pretending to call someone on her radio. Alyssa stood there for a moment, trying to stay calm. Her hands were shaking slightly, but she refused to let them see her cry. She looked at her phone, took a breath, and made a short call. "It's happening again," she said softly. "You know what to do." She ended the call and slipped the phone back into her bag. Then she turned, looked straight ahead, and waited. The passengers were watching. The woman with the phone kept recording. The energy on the plane had changed. Everyone knew something wasn't right. Alyssa didn't say another word. She just stood there, calm, silent, and strong. Alyssa stood quietly in the first-class cabin. She could feel the stares from all around. Some passengers looked confused. Others looked amused. But no one said a word. The flight attendant, Cheryl, returned after a minute. Her face was serious now. She looked Alyssa straight in the eye. "I just checked with the gate agent," Cheryl said loudly. "And they told me you don't belong in this seat." Alyssa was shocked. That couldn't be true. She had booked the seat online. She had the confirmation email. She had the printed ticket in her bag. "That's not possible," Alyssa said, her voice calm but firm. "This is my seat. I paid for it. Please double-check." Cheryl gave her a cold smile. "Look, miss, you're holding up the flight. I suggest you stop pretending and take your seat in economy before I call security." Some passengers gasped. Others started whispering. A man from across the aisle chuckled. "She probably won a free ticket, or something," he said with a smirk. "No way she can afford first class." Alyssa's face remained calm, but her heart ached. She knew what was happening. She had seen this before, being judged, questioned, and pushed aside because she didn't fit someone's idea of who belonged in first class. Cheryl walked over, took the ticket from Alyssa's hand, and without even reading it carefully, ripped it in two. "There. Now go sit where you belong," she said. A few people gasped. Even the woman who had been recording earlier stood up. "That's too far," she shouted. "You just destroyed her ticket." But Cheryl didn't care. "Mind your business," she snapped. "She's obviously lying." Alyssa stood frozen for a second. She looked at the torn paper in Cheryl's hand. That ticket was proof. That ticket was hers. And now, it was gone. She could feel anger rise in her chest, but she didn't shout. She didn't cry. Instead, she took a deep breath and looked Cheryl in the eye. "You're making a mistake," she said softly. "A big one." Cheryl rolled her eyes. "Sure. And I suppose next you'll say you're the owner of the airline." A few people laughed, but not all. Some were beginning to feel uncomfortable. The situation was getting worse by the second. Suddenly, a voice came from behind. It was the same woman who had recorded the video earlier. She stood in the aisle, still holding her phone. "I got everything," she said loudly. "The way you spoke to her, the way you tore her ticket. This is going online." Cheryl turned around quickly. "You can't film here. That's against policy." "Too late," the woman replied. "You've already embarrassed her. You've disrespected her in front of everyone. And now you're going to be famous for it." Cheryl looked nervous for the first time. She didn't like being filmed. She didn't like losing control. Meanwhile, Alyssa quietly reached into her bag and took out her phone again. She made another call, this time putting it on speaker. "Hello," a voice answered. "It's me," Alyssa said. "They tore my ticket." There was silence on the other end for a moment. Then the voice replied, "Don't move. I'm handling it now." Alyssa ended the call and put her phone away. Her face showed no fear. She turned to Cheryl again. "You'll regret this," she said softly. Cheryl scoffed. "Is that a threat?" Alyssa didn't answer. She just stepped aside and leaned against the wall near the first-class curtain. The passengers were now completely focused on her. The woman with the phone kept recording. Even the rude businessman had gone silent. A few minutes passed. Nothing happened. The plane was still at the gate. Then suddenly, a voice came over the intercom. "Flight attendants, please pause boarding and remain in your current positions. Do not close the aircraft door." Everyone looked around. What was going on? Then they heard hurried footsteps outside. The door to the plane opened again, and in walked a tall man in a suit, followed by the airport operations manager. They looked serious. Cheryl looked surprised. She walked over. "Is something wrong?" she asked. The man ignored her and walked straight to Alyssa. He nodded. "Miss Jordan." Alyssa smiled. "Yes. I'm so sorry. We received your call. Please allow us a moment to correct everything." Now everyone's eyes were wide. Who was Alyssa? Why was the airport manager talking to her like she was important? Cheryl stepped back, suddenly unsure of what was happening. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," she said quickly. "I was just trying to follow policy." But the manager held up his hand. "Please step aside, ma'am. We'll speak with you in private shortly." Passengers whispered louder now. Some were already texting, others filming. Alyssa remained calm. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just stood quietly as the people who had judged her began to feel nervous. And then, for the first time since the plane began boarding, everything went silent. Alyssa stood in her new office, high above the city. The windows stretched from wall to wall. Below her, planes took off and landed every few minutes. She could see the runways, the terminals, and the busy movement of people from around the world. But inside the room, everything was quiet. She walked slowly to the desk, her desk now, and sat down for the first time. There was a nameplate on it. Alyssa Jordan, Chief Executive Officer. She ran her fingers over the smooth wood and let out a slow breath. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like responsibility. A knock came at the door. Her assistant peeked in. "Ma'am, the board is ready for you." Alyssa nodded. "I'll be right there." She stood up and glanced at the mirror before leaving. No fancy jewelry. No makeup. Just her natural self in a dark blue suit. Confident, calm, and focused. She walked down the hall. Every person she passed gave her a respectful nod or a quiet smile. People she'd once only seen from afar were now waiting to hear her speak. As she entered the boardroom, all eyes turned to her. The chairman stood. "Miss Jordan, Madam CEO, we're honored to have you here." She smiled politely and took her seat at the head of the table. The meeting began. Reports, numbers, schedules, budget plans. But then Alyssa raised her hand. "Before we move forward," she said, "I want to address something important." The room quieted. "I know everyone saw the video. I know the whole world did. And I want to be clear, this is not just about one flight or one incident. It's about how people are treated every day, even in small ways." Some people nodded slowly. She continued, "This company will lead with respect, from the ground crew to the pilots, from gate agents to flight attendants. Every person, no matter their race, gender, or appearance, will be treated with dignity." Silence. Then one board member said, "And if someone doesn't follow that?" Alyssa didn't hesitate. "Then they don't belong here." The message was clear, strong, firm, fair. The board agreed. From that day forward, things began to change, not just inside the company, but across the entire airline industry. Training programs were rewritten. Leadership positions were open to more diverse candidates. A zero-tolerance policy on discrimination was put in place. But most importantly, a new culture was born. Months passed. One day, Alyssa boarded a flight, this time not as a passenger, but as the CEO. She wore simple clothes, carried her own bag, and didn't ask for special treatment. As she entered first class, the flight attendant smiled warmly. "Welcome aboard, Miss Jordan," she said with kindness. "It's an honor to have you." Alyssa smiled back. "It's good to be here." This time, there were no frowns, no rude stares, no torn tickets, just respect. She took her seat quietly. Across the aisle, a little black girl was sitting with her mother. She kept looking over at Alyssa, eyes wide with wonder. After a while, the girl whispered to her mom, "Is that her?" From the video. Her mom nodded. "Yes, sweetheart. That's her." The girl turned and looked at Alyssa again. Alyssa smiled gently and leaned toward her. "Hi," she said. The girl grinned. "Hi, I want to be like you one day." Alyssa's heart warmed. She nodded softly. "And you will be. Just remember, never let anyone tell you where you do or don't belong." The plane began to move. As it took off into the sky, Alyssa closed her eyes for a moment. Not to sleep, but to think. About where she had started. About the ticket that had been torn. The eyes that had judged her. And the moment she chose grace instead of anger. Because that choice had changed everything. And now she flew not just above the clouds, but above the hate, above the doubt, above the limits others tried to place on her. The world had tried to tell her where she didn't belong. But now she was in charge of the skies, and she would make sure the skies were open for everyone, no matter what they looked like. As Cheryl stepped off the plane, the door closed behind her with a quiet thud. But to everyone inside, it sounded like justice. Alyssa remained standing near the front of the first-class cabin. Her face was calm, but her eyes were sharp. She had just been humiliated by a woman who didn't know her, and now that same woman had lost her job in front of dozens of witnesses. Still, Alyssa didn't feel joy. She felt tired. Tired of proving herself. Tired of being doubted. Tired of the stares. Passengers were whispering louder now. "That woman is the CEO. Did you see how calm she stayed? I feel bad. I judged her too. She handled that with so much class." Some people looked down at their phones. Others looked at Alyssa with new respect. But it wasn't the kind that made her feel good. It was the kind that only came after someone learned who she was. Before that, they had all stared, doubted, or ignored her. One woman in first class stood up, walked over to Alyssa, and smiled kindly. "I just want to say, I'm sorry for how things started. No one should go through that." Alyssa gave her a small nod. "Thank you." The kind woman hesitated, then added, "I didn't speak up earlier. I should have. That was wrong of me." Alyssa looked her in the eye and replied gently, "Silence speaks too, sometimes louder than words." The woman nodded slowly, understanding what Alyssa meant. Then she went back to her seat quietly. Suddenly, a little girl from economy class walked toward the front, holding her mother's hand. The girl stared at Alyssa with wide, curious eyes. "Mommy, she's a boss," the girl whispered. Her mother smiled, then nodded. "Yes, sweetie. She's the boss of the airline." The girl's eyes lit up. She looked at Alyssa and said in a sweet voice, "I want to be like you when I grow up." For the first time, a soft smile touched Alyssa's lips. She knelt down and looked the girl in the eyes. "You can be," she said. "Just don't let anyone tell you where you belong." The little girl beamed and gave Alyssa a quick hug before walking back to economy with her mom. It was a small moment, but a powerful one. Meanwhile, the tall man in the suit, Mr. Daniels, the airline's current CEO, spoke quietly with the pilot. They both looked serious. Then he turned to Alyssa. "Would you like to delay the flight and take the next one in peace?" he asked. "We can arrange a private jet within an hour." Alyssa shook her head. "No, let's keep flying. I want to finish this flight like any other passenger." Mr. Daniels smiled. "Very well. I'll be seated just a few rows behind if you need anything." He returned to his seat, and the pilot made a quick announcement over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We are now ready for takeoff. Please remain seated and prepare for departure." The engines roared to life. As the plane began to move, the passengers buckled up. Alyssa sat down in her original seat, 1A first class, the seat that had been denied to her just 30 minutes ago. She looked out the window for a moment, lost in thought. How many times had this happened before? Not just to her, but to others who didn't look like they belonged. She had power now, a title, money, but that still hadn't protected her from judgment. Then she thought of the little girl. Maybe this flight wasn't just about inspection. Maybe it was about sending a message. As the plane lifted into the sky, the woman behind Alyssa leaned forward and tapped her shoulder gently. "I just wanted to say, my daughter was watching everything. And I'm glad she saw you stand up for yourself with grace." Alyssa turned slightly and nodded. "Thank you. That means more than you know." For the rest of the flight, passengers were quiet, but the mood had changed. They weren't just flying to their destination. They were flying with someone who had just shown them something important. That confidence doesn't come from status. That power doesn't have to be loud. And that dignity, even when challenged, can change everything. Somewhere in the back of the plane, A man opened his laptop and started typing a blog post. I saw a woman get humiliated on a plane. Then she made a phone call that changed everything. And online, the video of Cheryl tearing the ticket had already gone viral. Millions of views, thousands of comments. People around the world were watching. And Alyssa, she just leaned back in her seat, closed her eyes, and let the plane carry her forward. She wasn't done yet. The flight had been in the air for almost 2 hours. Most passengers had settled into their seats. Some were reading, some were sleeping, and others were scrolling through their phones. But not everyone was relaxed. In the back of the plane, the internet was on fire. The video of Cheryl, the flight attendant, tearing Alyssa's ticket and insulting her had now been seen by over 3 million people. The woman in seat 14C had uploaded it with the caption, "This black woman was told she didn't belong in first class." Then the CEO showed up. The comments came pouring in. She handled that with class. How many people go through this every day but don't have power to fight back? This flight attendant's career is over. Queen behavior, calm, strong, unbothered. Even news sites had started picking it up. Breaking. Woman denied first class. Turns out she's the airline's incoming CEO. On board, Alyssa didn't know how far the story had spread. She had turned off her phone and was quietly sipping water, looking at the clouds outside her window. But the whispers hadn't stopped. 2 rows behind her, a man in a business suit leaned over to another passenger and said, "I think I saw her at a leadership summit once. She was the youngest speaker there." The woman beside him nodded. "She's brilliant. I read an article about her last month. Something about changing airline culture." In economy class, some passengers were watching the video right there on the plane using in-flight Wi-Fi. People were starting to connect the dots. That's her. She's on our flight. That happened just an hour ago. And just like that, the energy in the plane shifted again. Not because people were afraid, but because they were waking up. They were realizing that what they had witnessed wasn't just a small mistake. It was a deep problem many people face daily. At the front of the plane, Alyssa finally opened her phone. Dozens of messages popped up instantly. "Are you okay? The video is viral. You handled it perfectly. CNN wants an interview. This is bigger than just a flight." She sighed and locked the phone again. She wasn't thinking about interviews. She was thinking about responsibility. Across the aisle, an elderly man with kind eyes leaned over. "I saw what happened earlier," he said softly, "and I just want to say, I wish the world had more people like you." Alyssa smiled gently. "Thank you, sir." He continued, "You could have shouted. You could have made a scene. But you didn't. You kept your head high. That takes strength." Alyssa nodded slowly. "It's not the first time something like this has happened. But I hope, maybe it'll be the last time it happens on this airline." The man gave her a look of deep respect. "With you in charge, I believe that." Meanwhile, back in the galley, one of the flight attendants, Maria, the youngest on the crew, sat quietly on a jump seat, looking at her phone. Her hands trembled as she watched the video again. She hadn't stopped Cheryl earlier. She had stayed silent. Now she felt guilty. Maria looked toward first class. Alyssa had shown nothing but grace and calm. And now the whole world knew what had happened. Maria stood up and walked to the front of the plane. She approached Alyssa slowly. "Miss Jordan," she said softly, "can I speak to you for a moment?" Alyssa looked up. Her face was gentle, but serious. I wanted to say I'm sorry. I didn't stop her. I didn't say anything. I just stood there." Alyssa studied her for a moment, then asked, "Why didn't you?" Maria's voice cracked. "I was scared. She's been here longer. I didn't know what to do." Alyssa nodded. "And now?" Maria took a deep breath. "Now I want to do better. I want to speak up next time. I don't want to be quiet when something wrong is happening." Alyssa reached out and placed a hand on Maria's shoulder. That's a start. Change always begins with one voice. Make sure next time it's yours. Maria nodded, eyes full of emotion, then turned and walked back. It was a small moment, but it meant everything. Back in the air, the plane continued to glide across the sky, smooth and steady. The world below was watching, and Alyssa knew this was more than a personal victory. It was a reminder to everyone. You never know who someone is, so always treat them with respect. Because one day the person you look down on might be the one looking down from the top. The flight began to descend. After hours in the air, the city lights below sparkled like stars. The captain's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing shortly. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. Thank you for flying with us. Alyssa took a deep breath and looked out the window. It had been a long flight, but not just in miles. It had been an emotional journey. She was used to facing judgment, but this time, the world had seen it, and now the world was talking about it. In her seat, she sat tall, not angry, not proud, just ready. Ready to face what would come next. As the plane dipped lower, the passengers buzzed quietly with conversation. Did you see the latest article? One man whispered. They confirmed it. She's the new CEO, officially announced next week. Another passenger leaned across the aisle to say, I feel like I just witnessed history. A flight attendant passed by, offering one last drink. This time, she smiled kindly at Alyssa. Would you like some water, Miss Jordan? Alyssa smiled and nodded. Yes, thank you. No sarcasm, no tension, just simple, polite service, the way it should have been from the start. In the back of the plane, the passengers in economy class were watching the viral video on their phones. One teenager whispered to his friend, Yo, she's trending #1. Even celebrities are posting about it. A woman nearby said, I'm glad my daughter saw this. She needs to know that grace beats hate. As the plane touched down, the wheels bumping softly on the runway, everyone leaned back in their seats. The flight was over, but something deeper had just begun. When the seatbelt signs turned off, people didn't rush to stand like usual. Instead, there was a strange, respectful silence. All eyes turned to Alyssa as she stood up and collected her bag from the overhead bin. She didn't rush. She didn't hide. She stood like the leader she was. The door opened, but this time, something unexpected happened. A group of airline executives stood outside the gate. Suits, badges, security, reporters, cameras. The CEO, Mr. Daniels, stepped forward and extended his hand. Welcome home, Miss Jordan, he said with a proud smile. Alyssa stepped off the plane and shook his hand calmly. What's all this? She asked softly. He nodded toward the cameras. The board has seen the video. The public has seen it, and we decided there's no need to wait. He handed her a black folder. On it was the company's logo in gold. Inside was a single letter. Her official appointment as the CEO of the airline. Effective immediately. Alyssa looked at him in surprise. You're serious? He nodded. You showed the world who you are, Alyssa. Calm under pressure. Strong. Fair. And real. That's the kind of leader we need. Behind her, passengers were slowly exiting the plane, and they all paused to see what was happening. Some clapped. Some nodded with quiet approval. One woman said softly, That's our CEO. Then someone else called out, Speech, speech. Alyssa smiled, just a little, and turned to the small crowd. She cleared her throat and spoke in her calm, clear voice. I didn't plan for any of this. I just came here to fly, just like all of you. I didn't expect judgment, and I didn't expect to go viral. But maybe this moment isn't about me. She paused and looked around. Maybe it's about what we all need to remember. Respect should come first, not after a title, not after a viral video, Not after someone proves their worth. The crowd was silent, listening closely. "I will lead this airline," Alyssa said. "But I will also work to change its culture, so that no one, ever again, feels like they don't belong just because of how they look." She gave a soft smile. "Let this flight be the last one where someone's seat is questioned because of their skin color. Let it be the first of many flights where dignity flies first." Applause broke out. Loud, honest, proud. And Alyssa stood there, not as a victim of racism, not as a headline, but as a voice of change. Back inside the terminal, a news crew rushed forward. "Miss Jordan, how does it feel to become CEO in such an unexpected way?" Alyssa replied, "It's not how I wanted to start, but maybe it's how I needed to." As the cameras flashed, the world watched a black woman, once questioned, doubted, and disrespected, step into power with grace, strength, and purpose. And somewhere, watching from a screen in another city, a little girl smiled and whispered, "That's who I want to be." The plane was quiet now. No more laughing. No more rude comments. Every passenger could feel the tension in the air. Something strange was happening, and everyone could sense it. Alyssa stood near the front of the cabin, calm and strong. The airport operations manager had just spoken to her with deep respect, calling her Miss Jordan and apologizing. That single moment had changed the mood of the entire plane. Cheryl, the flight attendant who had mocked and embarrassed Alyssa minutes ago, now stood awkwardly by the wall, her hands shaking just a little. She had no idea who Alyssa really was. And that was the beginning of her trouble. The operations manager leaned closer to Alyssa and said softly, "The call you made reached the right person. He's on his way now." Alyssa nodded once, still calm. "Thank you." The other flight attendants looked confused. Even the pilot came out of the cockpit and walked toward the front of the plane. He looked at the manager, then at Alyssa. He gave a polite nod, then asked, "What's the situation?" The manager whispered something into the pilot's ear. The pilot's face changed instantly. His posture straightened. He looked at Alyssa again, this time with respect in his eyes. He didn't say much, just a quiet, "I understand." Then he turned back to the cockpit and made a private call from the radio. The door of the cockpit closed gently behind him. Passengers were whispering loudly now. The woman who had been recording everything was still filming. She had posted the video online, and people were already commenting in real time. Who is she? Why is the manager treating her like royalty? Did that flight attendant just ruin her life on camera? People were curious, confused, and nervous. And Cheryl was scared. She tried to stay calm. She tried to smile like everything was okay. But deep inside, her heart was racing. She walked slowly toward the galley and pulled another flight attendant aside. "Do you know who she is?" Cheryl whispered. "No," the other attendant said, eyes wide. But the manager called her Miss Jordan, and the pilot just made a special call. That's not normal. Cheryl swallowed hard. Then the plane door opened again. This time, a tall man in a dark blue suit stepped inside. He wore no name tag, no airport badge, but when he walked in, everyone felt his presence. He looked powerful, calm, in control. He looked straight at Alyssa and smiled warmly. "Alyssa," he said, "I came as fast as I could." Alyssa smiled back. "Thank you for coming." Cheryl's mouth dropped open slightly. This man clearly knew Alyssa, and he didn't speak to her like a stranger. He spoke to her like someone who mattered. He turned to the operations manager and said, "Please remove the staff member who tore this woman's ticket." Immediately. Cheryl took a step back. "Wait, hold on. I was just following." "You were following nothing," the man said firmly. "You judged a passenger by how she looked. And now you're going to answer for it." Passengers gasped. The man turned toward the rest of the cabin and said in a clear voice, "Ladies and gentlemen, please stay calm. There has been a serious mistake by a member of the airline staff. We're correcting it now. Then he faced Cheryl again. You tore the ticket of a woman who owns a major share in this airline. Silence. Dead silence. Cheryl's face turned pale. What? What do you mean? She whispered. The man looked at Alyssa, then back at Cheryl. Miss Alyssa Jordan is not just a passenger. She is a board member, and as of last quarter, the new CEO in training. She was taking this flight for a quiet inspection. Gasps echoed through the plane. The businessman who had mocked Alyssa earlier now looked like he wanted to disappear into his seat. Alyssa stood there, still calm, but now there was fire in her eyes. Cheryl's hand shook. I didn't know. I didn't mean. You didn't need to know. Alyssa said gently, but firmly. You just needed to do your job with fairness and respect. That's something every passenger deserves. The tall man nodded. You'll be placed under investigation and likely terminated. Your behavior was recorded, and it goes against everything this airline stands for. Cheryl opened her mouth to argue, but no words came. Her eyes filled with tears, but no one reached out to comfort her. She had done this to herself. The operations manager motioned for her to step off the plane. Cheryl slowly picked up her bag and walked toward the exit, head down. No one clapped. No one smiled. It was just quiet. Alyssa turned to the man in the suit. Thank you for acting fast. You didn't need to call, he said. One word from you, and the whole airline listens. Alyssa nodded slowly. Sometimes people forget that respect is for everyone, not just the ones wearing suits. The man smiled. Well, they'll remember now.